Welcome, everyone. Today's roundtable segment is on inflammation. What is inflammation? Why does it seem to have to do with everything? Inflammation can regulate everything from poison ivy to multiple sclerosis to many different types of cancer, and it's linked to obesity, cardiovascular disease, joint pain, Parkinson's disease, and even Alzheimer's disease. Inflammation is another great way to track the process of aging, and more inflammation means you'll age faster. We're going to break this down in today's roundtable segment. I'm Connor Wander, and I'm joined by Julian Dallmeier
Hey guys, I'm here from Spain representing European countries.
and my girlfriend Heba Al Housseiny, who's a biochemistry student at UNC Chapel Hill.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Heba. Thanks for coming on. So, inflammation regulates essentially, or inflammation is the body's response to injury, stress, or infection. So you can kind of think of inflammation in the context of a scrape or cut that you get on your arm. First thing that happens, assuming you're not bleeding everywhere, is it swells up and it gets really red. This is because immune cells, like white blood cells, are moving towards that zone. They want to guard off that exposed skin and exposed tissue so that other organisms like bacteria, viruses, or parasites can't get in that tissue. They want to block it off and really start healing the process. And inflammation is a huge part of the healing process as well, as we might discuss later. We'll talk about maybe muscle damage or working out at the gym, something that's very near and dear to us. So we want you to be able to understand these basic concepts in science so that when we mention them later in interviews or you hear about them in science news or all over the internet, you know exactly what people are talking about and you know how it applies to your life and health and disease. Now, infection of any area should provoke a response by the immune system. That's a completely healthy and normal response. This injury or infection state and the immune response to it is called acute inflammation. But there are other types of inflammation, including chronic inflammation, which can be devastating in terms of long-term health outcomes that we see in hospitals and are really hard for doctors to treat with current medications and therapies. So we're going to go in today about what chronic inflammation can do to the body and how we can maybe minimize it and what are the diseases in which it's prevalent. So chronic inflammation can produce anything from joint pain to mental health disorders to irritable bowel syndrome. There are all sorts of poor responses that can be produced by chronic inflammation. Inappropriate inflammation can also cause damage by itself. So uh, s- uh, when inflammation happens and it's not proper, then we can get things like allergies. Now, I myself had some pretty terrible experiences with poison ivy. Do you remember any of that?
Oh my God. I don't even want to talk about it. Yeah. So poison ivy, that's a rough one. Now, would that count as chronic or acute inflammation?
That's an acute response, but it's an inappropriate response, actually. Not everyone's allergic to poison ivy. Now, poison ivy is kind of designed or has evolved to provoke this response in many people and many other organisms. That's why it's pretty successful as a species because nothing wants to eat it because they might get an allergic reaction. What is actually happening when that stuff touches your skin is it's an oil called urushiol, which provokes your immune system's response, and the immune system actually starts attacking the tissues that have been exposed to poison ivy, and that's why you bubble up and it gets really, really nasty really fast.
So it's your immune system attacking your skin, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, and all the tissue surrounding it. That's right. So the immune system is going after this urushiol. It's trying to get rid of the oil. It's trying to clear that out properly, which of course you'd want to do, especially if that oil was actually really toxic. Now, by itself, it shouldn't cause much damage, but it's your immune system's response that's so aggravating. It makes you itchy. It inflames it, of course, and you get all these red spots and bumps. And if if you're unfortunate enough to be as allergic as I am, your face can swell up. It can be a really bad time. I think
Yeah, it
there was
spreads so fast. Yeah,
a few years ago. What was it? We went paintballing, and I was put out for a
yeah.
couple weeks.
I remember when we both got it and we were stuck in your basement. We couldn't do anything. We ended up just playing video games, I think, for a couple of days, all inflamed.
Just to recover in the dark. Yeah, it was really gross. That's happened many times in my life, and it's one of the reasons I got interested in life sciences and especially immunology when I realized, like, oh, this explains why this is such a terrible experience.
It's
Um,
similar to an autoimmune response. No, I mean,
that's right. So
s-
that's another example of an inappropriate inflammatory response in the body.
yeah,
Now, if that happens like in the brain, for instance, you can get a case like multiple sclerosis. And multiple
exactly.
sclerosis is when the immune cells attack basically your neurons. Your brain is just being assaulted by your immune system. We don't really know why it happens, but it seems to be just a global inflammatory state, a global activation of your immune system, which of course isn't so desirable. And
It's
what
not good.
happens
Yeah, I
is
was gonna say we don't really know much about it, but the main theory is exactly that, that it's attacking the myelin sheath, which is basically the conductor region of the neurons. So interesting.
yeah, the myelin insulates the neurons and allows for like proper transmission in the same way that like wires are insulated with rubber. You can imagine a neuron wire being insulated with myelin. So it's really important, obviously. And when that stuff starts to degrade, you have all sorts of issues. So people are starting to adjust inflammation via their diet and other therapies in like multiple sclerosis, for instance. We're going to talk a little bit about diet strategies today for sure. But some of the main ways in medicine that we tackle inflammation right now are steroid treatments, which I think we were both on that time we had poison ivy, right? Like prednisone, do you remember
Yep,
that?
we had to.
Awful side effects though. It's really, really bad. Basically depressed for like 2 weeks straight.
Now, is there any other way? I mean, like, let's say with the knowledge you have now, and you had, let's say you got poison ivy, would you do something differently, or what would be your strategy?
I don't really know. I mean, I think it's not worth taking the prednisone, honestly, even though the poison ivy was so bad. So the poison ivy medicines typically are like topical or they're like prednisone, for example. I think
Which is a
I'd
global,
be
yeah.
yeah, exactly. I'd be fine with using like a steroid cream, but yeah, the prednisone pill just put me down. I mean, you had the same thing happen to you too.
Yeah, it's just too, you got to weigh out the negative side effects always.
Not being able to sleep or eat, yeah, that wasn't worth it. I was going into work like a freaking zombie. I had to take off a couple days too.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember.
but also, what you can use to reduce inflammation are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So to go over steroids, steroids are natural hormones that are found in the body, and prednisone is like a synthetic or exogenous hormone that we can take as a drug. It's not produced in our body, but it can be metabolized into those things that do reduce inflammation. It has the same effects. We produce some of these hormones ourselves. A lot of them are produced from like cholesterols and stuff like that. So possibly eating a certain diet could actually reduce the inflammation, and maybe even in a poison ivy case. I'm not sure. But in such an acute case, I would imagine like diet adjustments aren't probably as effective as it would be in like a chronic inflammatory state like multiple sclerosis.
hmm So let's say you're suggesting that a high fat diet could possibly reduce inflammation in acute and even chronic inflammation cases like multiple sclerosis.
I think it's certainly possible, and I think there are a lot of success stories in the multiple sclerosis case in general. I don't recommend that anyone just jumps on a high-fat diet, especially
Yeah, you always have
without
to
doing
do
the
your research
research.
first and talk to your doctor, of course, right? We're
Yeah,
not here to give medical advice.
and some people respond completely differently. It also depends on what sort of fatty acid transporters you have and what sort of like cholesterol metabolism that you have in terms of genetics too. So you would might
hmm
expose yourself to some other chronic diseases by going onto a high fat diet. So these are different for everyone. So high fat diets, again, I wouldn't recommend them to just anyone casually to jump on them. I mean, I've had a lot of success myself, and I think that it reduces inflammation on my part. Like one way I kind of check myself for inflammation is just look for pimples and zits, and when I get a lot, I think I'm kind of pretty inflamed, and generally have a little more joint stress and pain around that time too. So this is all anecdotal, but you want to get like proper fats, of
Yeah,
course.
actually, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't think it's the eating fats is what's causing inflammation. I think it's the ratio of the fats that people are getting through their diet. So your body needs omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids, and those you can't get except from the foods that you eat. So I think that the issue with people who believe that fats are bad for them and they cause inflammation is that people don't have the correct ratio of omega 6 to omega 3 fatty acids. So omega 6s help stimulate your skin and hair growth. They maintain like bone health, they regulate your metabolism and your reproductive system. Omega 3s are part of the cell membrane. They affect the function of cell receptors. So clearly these two are very important, but the ratio of them in your body is what's most important. So the typical American diet tends to contain like 14 to 25 times more omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3 fatty acids. The ideal ratio of 6 to 3s should be 4 to 1, but the average American is actually eating a ratio of 12 to 1 or even as far as 25 to 1. So it's no brainer that people think that, fats cause inflammation or fats are bad for them. But it's because the American diet is very skewed towards omega-6 fatty acids.
So the problem with some high-fat diets may just be that the balance is completely skewed on those people, right? They could be doing the high-fat diet improperly. Of course, there is a genetic component, so it's another reason we don't advise just to jump straight into it. Do your research first. If you probably should take blood tests or at least have genetic tests maybe to know how your cholesterol transport works in your family. If you have sort of like cholesterol transport issues as a hereditary thing, then you might want to maybe avoid some of these things, but definitely focus on the proper balance of these omega 6 and
Right.
omega
And then a
3
lot
fatty.
of it is like, what does your body have in it, like that comes from your food that it can utilize in order to convert these omega 6 fatty acids into something that isn't inflammatory to your body? So you get most of your omega 6 fatty acids from vegetable oils such as linoleic acid.
It's so hard to
It is
say.
a really hard word to say. So that is converted into gamma linoleic acid, which is GLA in your body. So this is found in a lot of plant-based oils. So this can actually, like GLA could reduce inflammation in your body, but what happens is that you need a lot of like nutrients such as like magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, B3, B6 to help convert that GLA into like healthy DGLA that your body could use. So the problem with that is a lot of people are deficient in these nutrients, especially magnesium. So it's not that all of the omega-6 fatty acids are bad for you and are causing inflammation. It just could be that your body is lacking the certain nutrients from your diet that it needs to be able to convert omega-6s into something that is actually good for you.
So yeah, I mean,
I was going to ask Connor quickly, what are some examples of these different things to eat? You said plant-based, right?
No,
Give
so
us an example of plant-based oils.
it's actually GLA is found in plant-based oils, and I'm not exactly sure in which ones, but I mean, your body could also make GLA out of linoleic acid that's found in vegetable oils,
Okay.
right? So
you just need those enzymes to
you
be
just
active, right?
and you need those those nutrients.
Yeah, because the nutrients probably serve as cofactors for
Mm-hmm.
the enzymes, and your body is pretty good at triaging things. So if it needs them for other more important stuff like keeping you alive, it's probably not going to worry too much about like converting your fatty acids to something that might be a little more useful or beneficial, right?
Right. So then another issue about like fatty acids is it's about when it comes to omega 3s. So you have three main omega 3 fatty acids. So you have EPA, you have DHA, and you have ALA. So EPA and DHA come mainly from fish. So if you're on a plant based diet, you're not really getting those. And then DHA keeps your nervous system functioning and provides like anti inflammatory benefits. And then ALA, which is the one that is most easily obtained, is most common in the Western diet. It's found in a lot of the vegetable oils that I was talking about and the nuts, like flax seeds, and a lot of leafy greens. So let's just say that you're a plant based diet, you're not getting any EPA and DHA. Well, what a lot of people like to think is, well, that's fine. A plant based diet, it's really healthy because my body could just take ALA and convert that to EPA and DHA. So I don't need to be a meat eater. I don't need to eat anything because my body always knows what to do and it's efficient. But that's actually false because your body can convert ALA to DHA and EPA, but that like it occurs at a rate less than 1%. So it's not as efficient as people think, and your body isn't just capable of doing all these great things that people think it does.
Well, it can do things, but it needs a little helping hand at the very least,
I mean,
probably.
right, but when it's at a rate less than 1%, you can't
Basically
really
nothing.
rely on that to get everything that you need.
It's another good thing that we should probably do a roundtable on that alone and on bioavailability. So even if you're intaking tons of these oils and stuff like that, if you're not able to integrate into your tissues and your cell walls, and they're virtually useless, they're going to come out the other end and just bye bye. You won't be able to utilize them. And we probably could
Yeah, I
do a
would
whole
love to add
roundtable
to
on
that
that. Go
too,
ahead.
Connor. Is we could talk about the blood-brain barrier because that's a huge thing, especially for things that are necessary in the brain. A lot of them
Absolutely, yeah.
are degraded before crossing the barrier, and you just get them in the periphery.
Or they just can't cross the barrier at all because they aren't lipophilic enough to fit through,
Exactly.
and they need to be actively transported. But those mechanisms are in place. Yeah, we can definitely do a roundtable on that too. These things are starting to add up for sure.
But that's good. We got more work on our hands.
Exactly, yeah. So definitely seems like you should keep an eye on your fatty acid intake and definitely the balance of it. What what would be have a like your idea of an ideal maybe like a week's worth of fatty acids? So I mean, I'm of course thinking of like salmon. A lot of people take krill oil and stuff like that. Um, sort of vegetables that are high in avocado. These are all like
Hmm.
kind of
I mean, even if you
Olive
want to,
oil.
olive oil, right? Even
I
if you
have to rep
want,
my Spanish country.
I mean, even if you want to include a lot of like, I'm not trying to say that plant-based oils are bad for you, and you should definitely include them in your diet, but you should be careful where you're getting them from, and you want to read the ingredients to make sure that everything in there is natural. Because what happens is a lot of industries will like change the properties of these oils. So they want them to be cheap to produce and they want to modify them so they could last longer. So what that does, it is oxidizes like omega 6s in a lot of situations, and that causes damage to your DNA. It inflames your heart, like raises your risk for cancer. So omega 6s and plant-based oils are not bad for you, but I would just, say that be careful where you're getting these oils from. Make sure that you're reading, like the ingredient list, be aware of everything that's in there and, what process it went through in order to become what it is.
To be fair, people did suspect for a long time that omega 6s might directly promote inflammation because the way they're metabolized activates an inflammatory and growth pathway more so than the omega 3s. They activate a anti-inflammatory pathway. Although most of the major studies that have come out have said that there is no link between high omega 6 intake and inflammation. So that's definitely good news for people who are getting a lot of their maybe plant protein or just protein sources from, say, soy, which is known to be pretty high in omega 6. And you should definitely keep an eye on your inflammation levels throughout any sort of diet, of course.
I mean, right. I don't think, the issue is with the fatty acids themselves. I think it's the way they're produced. It's the way that we, like, what form we're intaking them in, and definitely the ratio, because you always want to keep a balance between anything that you're eating. You can't just eat a lot of one thing and expect to be okay and that you're not going to get any inflammation, because too much of anything is always going to be bad for you.
Bad news for meal preppers, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
That's why we alternate our weeks of meal preps. We never do the same thing twice.
That's true, yep.
Except for chicken and green beans, I do that all the time.
So what are your favorite high-fat foods, both of you?
We definitely use a lot of olive oil. I will say that. We eat a lot of...
Day, yeah.
Do we eat?
Avocados.
Garbage. Eggs. We love... we eat a lot of avocados.
Eggs are the gold standard, I think.
Right. We eat a lot of yolk.
Yeah, don't take
Yeah,
the
we
yolk
never
out.
ever do. Back in my bodybuilding days, when I first started, I used to think egg whites. I would buy a carton of egg whites and I would literally chug.
Disgusting.
I would chug it after my workouts, and it really doesn't have a flavor. Like if you try it, it's not what you think it is. But it's just that it's that idea that's ingrained in us. Fats are bad for you. Like fats are gonna make you fat. So you tend to like stay away from these sources, but you don't consider the other things that you're missing out. Because yolk doesn't have just fat. So
yeah. I would say my favorite source is probably my chicken wing night. I do this once a
every
week.
week,
Yeah,
guys.
Connor, you've always loved chicken wings.
I can't help
Every
it, man.
single week.
There's a lot of fat on the skin, and the joints have the Bones have a lot of connective tissue on them. I love that too. But lately, what I've been doing is I bread my chicken wings in a very low carb breading. I mean, it's basically not actually bread. It's
And you
flaxseed
fry them.
meal. It's flaxseed meal and it's almond flour, and that's like super high fat. Both almonds and flax
Whoa.
are very high, and flax is known to be high in omega 3s, which is really nice. No actual breading, and then I just put herbs and spices on there, and yeah, I fry it. I don't deep fry it. I just throw some olive oil on it, and I either bake it at a really high temperature in the oven, or I put it in the air fryer, which is a pretty cool thing. It's basically
That's
like a
nice. Well, the good thing
yeah,
about olive oil is that burns at a really low temperature, so you don't have to get it really hot to get a good, nice glaze.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Interesting.
So you can throw them in the oven. Although you do have to be careful about putting it too hot, because then it can turn
Hmm.
carcinogenic. So
But I
Exactly.
think
So you can't go too hot. Yeah.
in order to have like healthy high fats, it's not really about like the main foods that you're eating. It's more about the small things. Like I make muffins and I put, coconut oil in them. I use almond flour. So it's about those small things that you get from the grocery store that will make your meals add up in its fat content. So,
Do you use butter at all to cook?
we do use butter. A very little. I mean, except when we're making waffles, I like to
very
stack
little.
I
butter.
use a lot of butter. Yeah, I stack
Yeah,
butter for almost everything.
Describe it.
but no, there was a while where I was making everything with coconut oil, like literally everything you
Yeah.
could think of. Yeah, but eventually,
Certainly
you
works
get
too.
tired of it and you want to try new things. So
Well, it adds a
Yeah.
little strange coconut flavor. Like I,
it
I, I remember
does.
making eggs with coconut oil, and I was
Hmm.
like, ugh.
Yeah, and if you're not into that, it's not going to be
Strange.
delicious for you at all. Yeah,
Compared to butter, I was like, come on, there's no comparison.
there's no comparison. Absolutely.
It's not gonna be a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not gonna be a good.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I guess I'll add in my 2 cents. For me, I just like a big juicy steak with some like a solid amount of fat on there, and I won't eat all of it. Usually, I cut some of the fat out, but I'll eat a good amount. And,
I eat all of
and
it. Yeah, I
yeah, you animal.
save the
Yeah.
stuff.
I tried.
Speaking about that, Connor, I got 10 kilograms, which is about 22 pounds of steak coming in tomorrow. So life is good.
Nice. You order that online?
Life
That's pretty
is
sweet.
good. Yeah, I buy it from an ecological farm nearby. I guess they split the cow between, I don't know, 10 people or so.
Hmm.
And yeah, I get my portion.
Should look into that. I know there are a lot of local farms around here.
You should do that for sure, man. And you save a lot of money. You just throw it in the freezer the day before you want to put it. You want to cook whatever you want. You throw it in the fridge the same day or the day before, and by the time you're ready, it's ready. It's defrosted.
You got to be there to accept delivery, I'm sure. But
Yeah, I mean, of course.
anyway, so yeah, we're getting a little off far field here. Um, so yeah, fats are a really good way to modulate inflammation, probably. Another huge thing for me has been cutting out refined carbs and sugar, especially just like straight sugar. Now, it's really, really hard if you live in America, especially. I imagine it's still pretty difficult over there in Spain, or
Yeah, of
Julian,
course.
sorry, but yeah, it's in almost everything. You got to really watch the labels, and you it's in things that it should never, it has no purpose being in. Like in some sausages, they're starting to add sugar these days in
Are you
America. It's just
serious?
insane.
Well, honey maple sausages are something that, come
Yeah,
on.
that's understandable, I guess. But even the ones with like no sugar indication, the spicy ones have sugar, and it's like, what are you doing? Anyways, cutting sugar out can actually be really beneficial. So for a while, I thought I was celiac, which is basically you're highly gluten intolerant, you're gluten allergic. And my mother got tested for it, and she was found to be like mildly gluten intolerant according to the doctor. I never got tested for it, but around the same time, I stopped eating carbohydrates, and I had been eating tons of like pancakes and breads and stuff like that. It was really
I
nasty stuff.
remember these days, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I was also like in college, especially, I was drinking like 2 liters of juicy juice. Like it was called like I don't know. Yeah, it was just 100% juice,
Thought you were
which
gonna say beer.
no, I was supposed to drink plenty of beer, but yeah, during the days I would just like have this 2 liter bottle of juicy juice around. A lot of my college friends can attest to this. I always had juice on me. I was basically constantly
Disgusting.
pumping sugar in,
Yeah.
and you know what? I was having all these allergies, like really terrible allergies, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought I had mono for a while. I went to the doctor, got tested for that. Nothing was happening. I just really couldn't figure it out. So years later, when I cut sugar out, I start feeling way better. Um, Also, I had like basically irritable bowel syndrome right before I cut out sugar. That was basically like the final drop in the pan. I was like going to the toilet all the time. I was like pinned to the bathroom. It was not fun. Yeah,
It's really personal, yeah?
yeah, it was not.
Tell us more,
Anyway,
Tell
please.
us.
but what I think was going on there, and this is something that has been pretty documented, is that high carbohydrate diet can cause the overgrowth of pretty nasty intestinal flora, so like bacteria and fungi potentially that feed on the sugar in your gut. This is something we touched on in the microbiome roundtable for
Yeah,
those
go
who.
back and listen to it. If you don't know what we're talking about, go listen to our first roundtable segment on the microbiome, and you will get filled in.
Absolutely. Yeah, we go in on like how that can affect mood and stuff, and it certainly was affecting my mood, but I was a little more concerned about like my intestinal issues more directly and my energy levels. I was fatigued. It was really nasty stuff. So I decided to cut carbohydrates out entirely, and I felt a lot better. Now, what a lot of people say happens, and there certainly is literature to support this. If you're interested, let us know. That carbohydrate eating bacteria. Um, they of course thrive on sugars, and if you don't give them sugars for a little while, they'll start eating away at your intestinal mucosal lining, which is this dense matrix of carbohydrates that your body produces itself. This is like kind of a protective force field of carbohydrates and all sorts of little proteins that are integrated to form this barrier to keep the bacteria from entering your gut, intestinal and basically bloodstream lining. So once they start leaking through the gut wall, all your immune system gets activated. It's like the Great Wall of China being defended, and the Mongols or the Huns start coming over. That's a problem. So everyone's on alert, and the immune system starts reacting to that in a proper way, certainly. But if that happens chronically, then you can have a lot of fatigue because your immune system is being activated, certainly in your gut and probably all over the body. And this itself can cause kind of a gluten sensitivity too. So a lot of people think it is gluten. Well, gluten is commonly found in breads, which have all these high carbohydrate and highly refined carbs, which feed the bacteria. That then, if you don't feed constantly, like they're always asking for food. People on high carb diets might notice they have to eat all the time, and if you don't eat during that time, your gut bacteria may actually be eating away at this lining. And so when the toxins leak through, that's more inflammation, and even gluten can start to leak through these barriers and cause inflammation as well, because gluten isn't supposed to be in your bloodstream either. So your body produces a response against that. So it's basically provoking an allergy essentially to something that you should never really encounter anyways. I thought that was really
Whew.
interesting when I switched over with that, and that's why we're talking about high fat diet so much these days. Because if you have low carbohydrate, you need to get your calories from somewhere, and fat's probably the answer for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean they're long. That I have to tell you something. One of the problems I have with Spain is that bread is basically the staple of their diet. You wake up, you're supposed to eat bread. In lunchtime, you eat bread. Dinner time, bread is just like it's there always.
That's exactly what Lebanon
Now,
in the Middle East, yeah.
yeah, I'm sure it's crazy. I think
Pita
it's in
bread,
Europe too.
yeah.
When I was in Italy too, and it's just bread, bread, bread. For
No, they
breakfast.
love
I'm
having
used to.
like bread with like butter and jam,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's what
exactly.
we do
And
exactly
like a
as well, yeah.
coffee and
Mm-hmm.
sugar, or like a croissant or something
Yep,
sugary.
that's their breakfast, yeah.
Poof. And everyone thinks I'm crazy because I'm like, no, I don't eat breakfast. I just usually just fast for the morning. And they're like, what? How do you survive the day? I say, well, like, and then when I usually choose not to talk about dietary things with my colleagues because, for me, it's similar to politics. It's like, it's a dangerous topic and nobody wants to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I say what
Um,
I'm doing, and then I just stop talking about it after that. I don't try and like convert anyone for sure, because I know people are.
it turns into a political
Yeah,
battle,
I
it's
tried
better
doing that
not
on
to.
my Instagram one time because I was really tired of people saying, that all meat eaters are unhealthy or, fats are bad for you. And I made this huge post and I started a war. I got a lot of traffic and people were just, yelling at me and saying a lot of like really rude things they were irrelevant to what I was even saying in my caption. They were just like, you're a
The
terrible
keyboard
person.
warriors.
Yeah, you are trying to kill animals, and I thought it was just insane that people have such strong opinions about, diet, and like nutrition and exercise. It is really like politics and it can be dangerous. So I try to avoid it most times when I can.
But there are a lot of people like spreading misinformation. So there was a popular like Netflix documentary like
What the
called, I think,
health?
yeah,
Yeah,
what the
that's
health
that's
was
what I was
about.
told. That's I talked about that in my caption as well, and A lot of those like studies that they used in, that documentary were all associational studies. Nothing was correlated. And I think like when they went back to, look at through all the facts, they like found that only like 1% of it was actually true. I don't remember
Yeah, someone
what
fact
exactly
checked it
was. Yeah.
essentially. Yeah, she
What
was
was
on the
this?
Joe Rogan
Yeah.
podcast. You might have listened to that, Julian. Well,
I
they
have
didn't
not.
show they did not show correlation. Only showed correlation. They didn't show causation.
Oh,
That's
sorry.
something
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
do a roundtable on for sure. It's just a whole segment on correlation versus causation. Why you have to be careful when reading these studies, because you had one in your class, right? In
Oh,
your
yeah. So I'm in a genetics class, and my professor assigned us this paper called, lifestyle changes may lengthen telomeres, like a measure of cell aging. And for those that don't know, telomeres are like repetitive nucleotide sequences at the end of the chromosomes, and they basically
so they're like basically the end caps on your
caps.
shoelaces. If your shoelaces are your
Yeah.
DNA, yeah, they just protect it and keep it from fraying and getting damaged.
Yeah, so clearly like those are super important, and if those are damaged, it could cause a lot of problems and a lot of cell death. So this article took 35 men with prostate cancer. 10 of those were the experimental group, and for 5 years they had them change their diet to a plant-based, low carb and low fat diet. They had them do stress management. They gave them like social support. They had them do exercise, yoga, meditating. The point is that this study found that those 10 men over 5 years had a increase in their telomere length, while those other men that didn't change anything about their lifestyle had shorter telomeres. Well, that's no brainer. If you change your diet, your exercise, you're a healthier person overall. You would expect to be healthier. But what I don't like about this is because it basically promotes that fats are bad for you. They cause inflammation. If you were to cut them out, you'd have longer telomeres. And it also is saying that to be healthy, you have to be plant-based. So I think this study was very biased in the sense that it was really trying to say that, like this diet really affected the way these people are. But I feel like it didn't talk enough about, like was it the exercise or was it the stress management or the social support, So and then my professor was sitting there and telling us, so what did you learn, guys? And everyone was like, we need to eat a plant-based diet. Fats are bad for you. And I was sitting there and I really wanted to say something, I wanted to raise my hand. It wasn't an appropriate time. But I just, it was just really frustrating because it was only 35 men, and they don't really, they don't take into account that when you are a plant-based, if you have a plant-based diet, that you are trying to make other healthy, positive changes to your lifestyle. You want to be an overall healthy person. You want to exercise. While, if you have a bad diet, you're more likely to smoke or drink, excessively or not exercise because you're eating fast food. And you know what I mean? So it's not really the plant-based diet. It's everything else that follows that lifestyle change that people don't like to talk about.
Well, Connor, definitely in the future roundtable segment, we're going to have to talk about how to be critical with scientific studies and how to read them and understand really, the takeaway message. What do you think about that?
For sure. I mean, definitely, even in classes, obviously that's a problem. I think that study was also referenced in news articles where they said, "Oh, meditation lengthens your telomeres and prevents aging." Well, if these people are doing all this other stuff, how the heck are we ever going to identify one where the improvements actually came from? It's probably a combination of multiple sources: the improved diet and uh, improved exercise habits, and also social support is a huge thing that no one's been able to quantify. And that's fair. It's very hard to, how can you ever really measure that in terms of numbers that we can look at on a graph? That's so subjective, and every person interprets social support a little differently. So maybe that's a big data approach, then people can start data mining from their phones with. And of course, these studies have their own limitations, like funding too. And I'm sure that's why there were only 35 men in the study, 25 in the control group and 10 in the non-control group. It was over a few years.
It was 5 years, yeah. And they had prostate cancer. So you have another, underlying
Another
effect that
selective group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to measure something like that.
Yeah. Connor, even meditation is subjective. Like, how can you say this person was meditating?
Or are they meditating right?
What is the definition of meditation? You know what I mean?
Right.
Is one
because sometimes
they could
Connor
just be sitting there exactly.
Sometimes
So
Connor,
it's like, what?
yeah, he likes to
Yeah,
meditate,
go.
and he'll tell me, "Oh, you have to meditate with me," and I'll sit there if I'm not feeling it that
You
day.
have to.
And I know, but
You
like,
have to do
he
it.
guilt trips me into
And
it,
then,
and I'm like, okay, you know what, I need to do this. So I'll sit there, and I'm not really feeling it that day, so I'll just stare at the
so
wall,
you're just,
pretend like I'm really in the zone, meditating, and then I'll like every now and then I'll like take a look at him, and he's like really focused in.
No,
and then
no,
he
I'm
starts
just
to
staring at
sleep,
the wall.
and you're like, Connor, sleeping
So
doesn't count as meditating. Wake up.
right, so I think it's really hard. Like what meditating is subjective. You're right. I mean, some people,
It's super
yeah,
subjective.
right. So it's really hard to measure
Impossible
something
to
like that
study.
and to
One of my
say.
one of my co students, that's not a word, but one of my students in my master, he did some like a study on meditation, and he hooked up the EEG, and he measured some activity while people were meditating. But then the question is like, but how do you know they were meditating?
Yeah.
They just say, yeah, I was meditating, but what does that mean? How are they lying?
Like, what are you
It
thinking
gets really
about?
complicated.
Yeah, like,
Yeah, exactly.
right. And that's,
Anyway,
and I don't think
I
that's
wanted
science, Like, there's
it
no
gets complicated
hard-based
to measure
data.
some things.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about exercise and inflammation, because inflammation is not always bad, right, Connor? And
Yeah.
Heba, of course.
So inflammation, again, just to recap, is it's your body's natural response to injury or infection or some sort of stress, right? So if stress is hit your body or your muscles, like when you're working out, you're intentionally causing damage to your muscles at that point. If you're really straining yourself or at least pushing the limits in exercise, you're definitely going to cause damage to your muscles. That's okay. They're built to get damaged and then repair themselves, right? So this inflammation is a huge part in that process. And trying to maybe take like medications to limit your soreness or something like that, that could be bad. So it relies a lot on these cytokine signals, which are these kind of alarm signals for the body when they detect damage. And if you interfere with those, you might actually have problems regaining muscle or repairing it. Are there any
Yeah,
strategies you
actually,
use?
yeah, I was gonna say there were two studies that said that NSAIDs, which are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, were shown to blunt muscle growth. So that's going to say you go to the gym and you want to get stronger, bigger, whatever. You exercise and you're actually doing damage to your muscles, and which are actually, to be more specific, the Z discs, which are the contractile part of your muscle. So you're doing damage to this, and then it grows stronger, based on your inflammatory response. So you're going to get inflamed, your muscles are going to be sore, they're going to hurt, but this is actually going to bring blood and all the good stuff to your muscles and to start the recovery process. So if you're taking these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, it's been shown that you're actually not going to grow as much muscle and not going to recover naturally. Now, what I like to do, I'm a huge fan of cold showers, as you know, Connor. It's
Is that where he gets it from?
probably
Because
it's
got it
one
from
of
the
the
same
most
podcast,
he's
I
always
think.
like, Heba, you should
difficult things.
take cold showers. I'm like, no, I don't want to. No.
No. But once you go cold shower, you never go back. It's just
Exactly.
one of those.
You just gotta try
It's
it once.
painful. It just doesn't
It
make
sucks.
sense to me.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Probably not right now because
exercise
it's
can
like
be
20
painful.
degrees
That's
outside.
true. Yeah.
That's the hardest part, is to do it during wintertime, actually. But for me, one of my favorite things to do for recovery is exactly that, a cold shower. Now, from my understanding of how the body works, I think cold treatment is not good directly after exercise. I think it's good the day after or 2 days after when you're sore. I think directly after, you want to let your body get inflamed and bring the natural cytokines, as Connor said, and all the nutrients, and then let your body do its thing. And then the next day is when you should do cold treatment if you want to. But I would say definitely stay away from NSAIDs,
So that'd be like
because
Advil,
those,
Well,
right?
yeah, Advil, exactly.
Ibuprofen.
In my opinion.
don't hot showers like promote the blood flow to your muscles, so they could like recover quicker?
But
Yeah,
the whole point is that
that's what Adler said.
what I actually do specifically is that I'll go to the sauna
Mm-hmm.
about 15 minutes, and then I'll do like 5 minutes, like ice cold, brutal, a brutal cold shower. And for what that does, I think, is that you're to the cold is gonna the blood is gonna leave your muscles and go to your heart to keep you alive in the cold shower, basically. And then what it's gonna do is when it goes back into your muscles, it's gonna bring fresh nutrients, whatever you've eaten recently, fats, all that good stuff, to your muscles to help the recovery response.
Well, it's also going to release like adrenaline and stuff too. So cold showers are specifically a little more complex, I think, because like you
Way
are
more complex,
shocked
yeah.
when you do that. Like that, it's kind of painful. You're like frozen.
And also
and-
they
Kind of
reduce like
painful.
the lactic acid buildup right in your muscles.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
But
think the
it's
biggest thing for me also actually regarding the cold showers is the adrenaline, like Connor said. I think it's noradrenaline and norepinephrine and epinephrine release
Yep.
in the brain, which is giving you a huge just boost in energy. I'm sure Connor can attest to this. After a cold shower, it's like it's like you just drank a double espresso. It's excellent.
Yeah, and overall, I think it can have some anti-inflammatory properties itself. But it has some effects on mood and stuff too. So how that all connects, I don't think any of us are qualified to really answer. But it certainly is a good idea to limit inflammation in the brain as well. Like I'm working on Alzheimer's disease, and inflammation is becoming an even bigger and bigger player in Alzheimer's disease as we understand it now, on the research side. So kind of the current understanding right now, there was a huge fight between all Alzheimer's researchers whether amyloid beta, which is one protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease patients, is like the one cause for the disease, or if it's another protein called tau, which also accumulates in Alzheimer's disease patients. So people couldn't really figure out what was going on. Amyloid beta would show up earlier in the disease, and then tau typically shows up later and seems to cause a lot of symptoms, especially through correlative studies. But what we're realizing now is that amyloid beta is probably just an inflammatory trigger. And once this inflammation starts in the brain, gets this vicious cycle going where microglia, which are the brain's resident immune cells, they're like the caretakers of inflammation. They control a lot of the inflammation in the brain by picking up on signals within the neural environment. They get hyperactivated, possibly due to the amyloid beta accumulation, and they just start clearing away pieces of the brain, like synapses, which are the connections between neurons. Sometimes whole neurons seem to be engulfed, and this can release all sorts of other junk into the brain, including tau, and that's when that starts to show up, we think. And that's really interesting because amyloid beta was also recently shown to have some sort of antimicrobial activity. So they found it binding to infectious particles in the brains of mice. So amyloid beta is kind of acting like an antibody in the same way that antibodies grab onto this infectious particles and these viruses in organisms to protect you. Amyloid beta might do the same thing, and then that sets off microglia. So if you had chronic brain infection, you might be at risk for Alzheimer's disease in that case. So actually, like herpes infected people have higher risk of Alzheimer's disease typically, and it's herpes is a neurovirus. In case you didn't know, it's a common sexually transmitted disease. It's normally just thought of as like a just something you get on your lips and stuff like that, but it can actually cause neuroinflammation. So all these things are tightly linked, and it's really the central crux is inflammation. It's not just Alzheimer's, of course. We have all these other diseases. So something to keep in mind when we're thinking about anti-inflammatory treatments. It's not just over the body. The brain can have a huge effect as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, Connor, we should do a whole roundtable on Alzheimer's. And actually, the next roundtable that we're planning to do is on CTE, which is a new neurodegenerative disease or disorder.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, I believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Encephal something.
Encephal something. But basically, this is coming out a lot in the NFL, NHL. I don't know. Probably the NHL too, actually.
NFL, yeah, NHL.
NFL, NHL. All the sports where head trauma is common. Actually, even in football. I mean, soccer players. Sorry, I've been living in Europe. They call it football. Even in soccer players, they're seeing that some of these players are having the same issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, the pathology and what we know so far. So look forward to that in the future. Also fighters, boxers, all that good stuff. We'll get deep into that next time.
Yeah, definitely. And a big link there is inflammation. It causes, like, these injuries
Exactly.
cause damage, and microglia are activated. Sometimes in extreme cases, I think circulating macrophages, which aren't supposed to be in the brain at all, do make it in, and they can really start wreaking havoc places. So it's kind of scary stuff, and you of course want to limit that. And there's a lot of other strategies through diet, like we said, and maybe even cold showers, meditation. Who knows? I'm open to all of it. So definitely, we'll toss these show notes, or toss all these studies in the show notes, references and stuff like that. Make sure people can track it all down.
Yeah, to learn more about cold treatment and all that, a big guy, a big name in the field is now Wim Hof. Of course, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Right?
Connor.
Yeah, he's great, actually.
So check out his stuff if you're interested in any of this cold shock treatment. If you have if you're brave enough.
That's right.
What else? So yeah, I think that about wraps it up for today. We're still on Kickstarter right now. We're about a week in. If you like our stuff, support us on Kickstarter. Also give us a review on iTunes. And yeah.
Really appreciate it. So Heba, if people want to find out more about you and what you're doing with nutrition and fitness, where should they reach you?
So I recommend going to my Instagram. It is protein_babe. Don't laugh at that. But from there, you can find my YouTube. You can contact me. My website's on there as well. My email. So Instagram is the easiest way to find every other way of reaching me.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Well, we look forward to having you on another time, Protein Babe.
Oh, thank you. Don't get comfortable using that.
Thanks for coming on, Heb.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Heba.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out for us. We'd love your support. We'd love if you could share this with others, and we love your feedback as well. If there's anything we could do better, something we didn't mention that you want to hear about, we can cover it in a future roundtable on inflammation, or maybe another one. So let us know.
Yeah. Also, if you have ideas or know anybody in the science or medical field that you think would be an interesting person for us to interview, please put us in contact with them, and we would love to do that.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
All right, until next time.